co-chairing IHE Pharmacy, and I have been contributing on behalf of IHE to the UNICOM project. Our agenda today, let me just skip the animation part. Basically, I would like to have a brief mention of how we collaborate, how different standards have collaborated to build something, and that something being content specifications and data exchange specifications within UNICOM. So how UNICOM was essential to produce those new standards, that new collaboration between the different standards organizations. How we take those specifications and we are now going to publish them in a way that they become available, or they are available even after UNICOM finishes. So when UNICOM is closing now, then we have the result of UNICOM. They are persisted and available for anyone to leverage from what we have delivered. And how those things can be impacting the different specifications that we have downstream, which is the prescriptions, summaries, dispenses, medicinal product dictionaries. So how those things become enabled by the UNICOM results. And I'm saying that in the beginning of the project, we were wondering how can prescription, data dictionary, medication dictionaries, patient summaries, the supply chain, how can they be enabled with IDMP? Now we are going to say it's not with IDMP as a big, fuzzy, fluffy ball of knowledge, but as what UNICOM has delivered to make that more material, more relatable. And after we have those specifications, after we publish those, our path is to adoption and adaptation and testing. So going to have some chat today about how different organizations, global, regional, are adopting the standard and some of the UNICOM things that we have done, how this has happened, and then how this will now flow into countries, but also within the countries, different organizations that have the regulatory powers, and then within those countries also how this flows into hospitals, pharma industry, etc. So, and then at the end, how this whole thing gets testable. So how is the flow from when we started collaborating in standards, how do we end up with solutions that have actually an impact on the testing of real solutions that are implemented out there? A brief notion of the impact of what we are doing. In terms of when we talk about interoperability in the pharmacy area, we are talking about different regulators, people that maintain drug information, whether regulators or private companies. We are talking about the surveillance. We are talking about lots of systems that do prescription entry, dispensing. So this is the clinical flow. So it's not the flow of medication data exchange has several actors. And having those actors connected, that has been a challenge because there's no one single standard that fits all these purposes. And sometimes when you do things for prescription or for medication records / patient summaries, those requirements are different. And then maybe some part of the monitoring is not included there. And definitely when you talk about supply chain, you have different sets of requirements. So having those things in place and having standards that support all of those different use cases, that has become quite a challenge. And it's a real challenge, not just a technology thing, because when we talk about, can I get my equivalent for dispensing? How can I reconcile my medication lists? And how can I do pharmacovigilance based on the products that we have available? Or that are in the market in different countries. How can we do this? We are talking about, for example, I think the figure is from the Netherlands. Per day, 75 avoidable admissions in hospitals due to medication errors. Now, please don't let anyone say that UNICOM is going to solve all that, or IDMP is going to solve all that. Most of these things are errors that are avoidable, but they will happen because clinicians are looking at wrong patient data or patient data from the wrong patients, or some data is just not in place, or there's no information available. So even those related to systems, they are not exclusively because of product identification, but there would be a small fraction of those errors that might be because the information is not available in a way that the physician can understand. So Product identification will play a small role out of these 75. I do not know if it will be 7, if it will be 0.75, I don't know. But that's what we are here to also to address. It's just the impact of these things also into medical situations. So a slide kindly prepared by our colleague from Estonia and used in a workshop. This actually shows a bit of why do we need these things? Why do we need to see how medication needs to be properly identified? Well, sometimes if you have all these IDMP concepts in place, you can have the same manufactured item available as two packaged products, and then are they equivalent? Are they not equivalent? Can we have some grammar that allows us to see if those products are the same, and if I can use one or the other? The difference between these is that it's the number of packages. So is the number of packages something that we can use? And I just started with this example to say maybe briefly that product equivalence is not that straightforward, because until we started UNICOM, before we started UNICOM, product equivalence is let's find the upper identifier or the next identifier that is common. So the package is not a common identifier between countries. That's fine. Let's look at the substance, for example, or let's look at the classification. And then we realize that by doing that, we are always looking for what is the best identifier that serves all the purposes, and that is not possible, or that's not sufficient. We learned that through Unicoms. We learned that Unicom so IDMP does have the mechanisms for us to have a more structured way of finding, are these equivalents, yes or no? But we needed Unicom to make us realize that how can we use that grammar, that set of concepts to actually find a more accurate notion of correspondence between products, besides do they have the same substance? Because having the same substance, thanks now to the work that we've done in Unicom, actually means very little compared to what we can do in terms of medicinal product identification. And when we talk about Unicom and IDMP, the other thing that we started with is the magical the expectation of magic, that once everyone adopts fully IDMP, everyone will be interoperable. This is for one product. This is the data model for one product. I don't think anyone would expect to see that in a prescription or in a patient summary or in a dispense record. It's just not possible. So what does IDMP compliance mean? The work that we have done, and I'm sharing this as part of that collaboration to reach some conclusions, is that we need to deliver to the industry, to the governments, things that make sense. Besides, if you know as much as those people in the central regulatory agency, you will be fine. That's not what we have to do. What we have to do is, what are the minimal things that you need to be compliant with for safe dispensation of a product, for safe identification of a product across borders? And that's pretty much what we have. So starting with, regulators will need to do some full IDMP or more full IDMP compliance, whatever full IDMP compliance means. I think we even did not go there, because it can mean rather big basket of requirements. What we have is that we reduced IDMP for clinical purposes. And we have a couple of key concepts. So this is a bit on the content. Apologies, I'll step out of the content, of the rabbit hole of content. I just want to show these are the kind of conclusions that we drew from Unicom. That we have medicinal products, marketing authorizations, packaged products, manufactured items. So those are key concepts that if we exchange that data without all this complexity here, if we exchange this data, we can actually have a chance of saying, here's a simplified, a reduced model of IDMP that actually can be used for clinical purposes. It's still very complex. There's still lots of attributes here, and I still don't think that every prescription will contain the dose form and the classifications and the MPIDs and the market acquisition numbers and the PCIDs and the outer and inner packages. This is still not the information that we want in a prescription. Most likely in countries and across borders, we'll just have one code and a few attributes. And that's what we have gone through. So how can we reconcile the huge complexity of IDMP, the reduced minimal data set of elements that we have for clinical purposes, and how does that work? How does that combine with the actual thing, which is safe identification of products across border, safe dispensation. So we went through that path. So how we did it, we worked together with other SDOs and agencies. I'm referring to the monitoring center in Uppsala, the medicines agency, the European Directorate for Quality of Medicines, um, and we work together to compile specifications that meet the UNICOM needs. So not to say how IDMP is going to be applicable everywhere, but to see for the purposes of UNICOM, how can we make use of those standards. Another thing that we did is we found and covered gaps in the standards. So we discovered them and then covered by looking at IDMP has some lack of clarity. HL7 fire has some minor issues that we needed to resolve. So working together, we actually solved those things. We also realized that there was some expectations on terminology for IDMP. So IDMP bringing the terminology thing, and it doesn't. So we also had to provide some guidance on which parts of the terminology can be covered, not by IDMP, but for example, in this case, by DQM. Or where is the terminology for substances? It's still not available. So we have something. And where is the value set for pharmaceutical product identifiers? So by doing this, we lots of discussions on seeing what is there, what is really there, not as the one magical solution that is IDMP, but what is really there and what we needed to build on top of this. And to do this, we had some kind of side benefits. Tooling, we developed a lot of tooling and a lot of things that would help the adoption, because it was painful to see to have this migration from something that was not really concrete, like, or not really applicable at IDMP, which is on the logical level, making it technical. So we developed some tooling. We developed some lessons learned, and we are actually compiling some things that, some do's and don'ts of adopting IDMP through UNICOM. And also very important, I think actually this is the more important thing, is the collaboration that we had between different stakeholders, between the regulatory agencies, between the standards, between the country agencies and the European agencies, global agencies like WHO. How did we make this this collaboration? How did we extend it as well? For example, the Medicines Agency, the European Medicines Agency, has begun their adoption of their use of fire implementation guides, which is really good. And I think UNICOM has had an influence into that, in saying this is how we all want to collaborate. And I think we kind of had a good influence through those discussions. Not that we pushed for it actively, we did, but because the fact that we were all in the same room, all discussing the same things, we realized that, yeah, there's ways for us to collaborate. So I would introduce, first of all, I will get my power to my laptop, I'm sorry. Otherwise you'll have no slides and just my voice. That's also not what we want. So when we talk about the UNICOM specifications, we had a couple of things. The UNICOM implementation guide. So it's a rather long, and we can show it later. I think together we can show it. So it's something that exists out there, has been maintained, has been recently cleaned up, but it's a bunch of fire specifications. So that's for the technical people and a bit for the functional people as well, to look at what does this IDMP mean for me? Or in other words, what has UNICOM done that facilitates my understanding or my usage of IDMP? So there's a couple of specifications in the UNICOM implementation guide. So it's a fire implementation guide. It's a fire-based specification about the content that may be exchanged. We don't say that this is the whole thing that everyone has to exchange. So going back to that big slide, even this one, we don't say that you always have this information. What we say is that if you want to exchange this content, be aware that there is a terminology here, be aware that there is no substance terminology, be aware that strength and reference strength are different things. So those are the data specifications that we captured, and we made it as fire specifications. And that is pretty much what we have delivered. So the first thing, so a UNICOM IG contains most of the data needs that everyone that's going to adopt IDMP, I am guessing that would mostly use a subset of that. I'll actually share the repository. We also worked on IHE transactions. And that, just to introduce what it means, for those who are not familiar, it's a set of prototypical data exchange specifications in different scenarios. For example, how can I share for a catalog of medicinal products, how can I exchange IDMP compatible data? Or how can I exchange data in clinical documents in a prescription? Or how can I use the different IDMP attributes in substitutions? We were just seeing the video about the patient-facing app. That patient-facing app uses clinical data. So that is a system that implements a data exchange. So what IHE transactions are about is that if you have two systems, they will share data. And if they share data about, for example, this is a product description, what IHE says is if you have a product description and if you want it to be compliant with the minimal set of data elements in IDMP that we have identified, which you should do, then this is how this data will look like. These are the required elements, these are the terminologies that you can use, etc. And we did it for three things. Exchanging product data, as I said, exchanging data in clinical documents, which is a subset of that. And when I say clinical documents, it can be just the identifier of the drug, which is what is mostly happening within countries, or across borders, we say this is the identifier, but since the identifier does not mean anything in your country, here's a couple of attributes that you also exchange. And then the substitution component became thanks to the work that we've done in UNICOM. So thanks to this overall simplification, actually let me spend 30 seconds on that. If you want to have a substitute drug, if you want to dispense an alternative drug because the one that you want is not in stock or is not available locally, this is not the way to do it. Because if you want equivalence to all of these, to each of these data elements, that would be impossible. So this is better. But do I really care that the package is a cardboard box? I don't. Or that the vial is of glass? I don't really care. Do I care that the market authorization number is the same for the two products? No, because by definition, I want to have a substitute in a different country. Do I care about the route of administration? Maybe I do. Do I care about the unit of presentation? I do. So there's a set of data elements that we thought for substitution, these are the things that are critical. And then we said we are exploring from the entire UNICOM specifications, data specifications, what are the data elements that are relevant for substitution? In this case, if you want substitution, most likely you are interested in the substance, the strength, and the dose form. And if you have those, you have already a good point for substitution. So how does the whole thing work? Again, starting from the starting point of having one standard that was supposed to cover them all, during UNICOM, we discovered that it's not possible to have one authority that provides all the data. So in this case, for example, the European Medicines Agency would not be the sole master of all the data if by all the data we include reference data. For example, the WHO Monitoring Center, they are owning the ATC classification. So they are not the masters of ATC classification. The European Medicines Agency has an equivalent classification, but ATC is owned in one side, the EMA classification is owned in the other side, and we need to have some data exchange there. Same way that the pricing and the usage condition and the local classifications of drugs, they are not necessarily at the WHO level, and they are not necessarily at the EMA level. So if one country considers a drug as a narcotic and the other one doesn't, that's fine. That's life. That's what we have now. So some local attributes and pricing information, of course, and any other categorizations, can this be used over the counter or must be prescribed. So all those things are things that exist locally in the national competent authority, and then we have these different players, each one providing different data. So this is just an introduction of how there's many data flows that we explored in UNICOM, and obviously there's not one single way of sharing all this data. Data has to be tailored for different purposes. So here we are talking about, reference data like substance codes, classification codes, data models from ISO. That what is the reference models that we have in IDMP in this case, the European Directorate producing EDQM terminologies they also master their own reference data. And at IMA, we have to keep track of all of those. But then at the end, there's going to be some flow of information that goes to the national contact points for e-health and to the actual systems in the market that provide um, that data, or that use that data together. So at the end, we want a prescription that contains the DQM codes for substance for those forms, and the WHO issued PHP IDs for classification, for example. We want all of that, and there is a big data flow for this. This is a bit on the analysis that we needed to do. How did we make it work? So we had to do some FHIR improvements, as I said, between the release 4B and the release 5. Thanks to UNICOM, we have a better, much more robust FHIR specification. We made a FHIR implementation guide that I mentioned and I will show later. Basically, that kind of consolidates the part of the IMA FHIR specifications. The IMA is owning their FHIR implementation guide. We also had the testable specifications being prepared and being finished. The content specifications, and with this we come the adaptation and compliance. I will just check this in a second. We have also the testing infrastructure in place from IHE. We also have some tooling that I will briefly mention. We have sample content, and most important of all, we actually brought these people together. We have a community. I really hope that following my request, people in the meeting remote, they will think of questions and challenges. Otherwise, I will be talking nonstop, and we don't want that. So, going a bit to the standards and the role of IHE, IHE pharmacy has been mostly driven by European participants, which is good for us because we kind of have a situation that is not, that is very much aware that the moment that, I don't know, if I drive half an hour from here, well, I'm in Brussels, so if I drive 2 hours away from here, I will be in another country. Which is a very rich scenario that we have to be exposed to. So the fact that there is no single catalog of products, the fact that regulations are different in different countries, this is what we have been very much exposed to in IHE pharmacy for a long time. So we are sensitive to these needs that we have because we are in Europe. We have been developing national cross-border or specifications that are used for national and cross-border usage. We started with V2 and CDA. Now we are moving on to FHIR. We have things on prescription, dispense, administration is there. We have something on the medication lists, and we do receive, so IHE does receive input from UNICOM. So UNICOM, those models that we have, those specifications that we have, they are going to be taken up by IHE. So let me just skip this. So basically IHE will host the transactions. I'll show them how they work. It's easier. And what does it mean for the industry? Before I go to show actually a bit of content. The IHE specifications are global. IDMP is also global, but UNICOM is EU driven, is focusing on the European Union needs. This means that we cannot make European specifications in IHE or HL7. We cannot. IHE and HL7 specifications have to be global by definitions. So what we have is that there will be a European flavor of the UNICOM specifications that will be retained. So IHE Europe will maintain that this is what Europe needs. If someone else in another country, in another continent, will have different specifications, that's fine, but we cannot let the European specifications be the only thing that the other countries will be subject to. We need to create international global profiles. But that's fine. IHE has a process for this. We have a thing called Volume 4, which is a national extension. So we can say this is the IHE specifications for catalogs, for substitution, and for clinical data exchange. This is what we have globally. And then we have a special flavor for European specifications. And then we can also have a Belgian flavor for those specifications, and then a Spanish flavor and the French flavor. So we have done some baseline specifications, but everyone can make derived specifications from this. That's one of the things that has been very much enabled by FHIR, or to make it better. That each industry may derive their own customization. So if I'm in Belgium and I have some attributes that only Belgium needs, that's fine. And if in Belgium I need multilingual product descriptions, that's fine. That doesn't mean that all the countries have to support multilingual product descriptions, but if we have it, then we know how to do it, and we have it, and we have ways to do this. Just a brief introduction to how this will be used for testing. One of the things that IHE has as a kind of a on the shelf or as a portfolio is not only about having specifications, it's about being able to test them. And testing them, for those who are in the business of delivering software, is usually something that should take as much time testing as we take developing, but that never happens. And testing is always a point of headaches. Because testing is not ready. We need a testing platform. We need test cases. And what test cases do we use? And it's not the worst thing that can happen is that we don't have properly tested systems. The second worst thing that we have is that I test my system in one way, another organization in another country tests their systems in a completely different way. So we have differently tested systems, and everything is okay. But because I chose my test and the other company chose their tests, we don't have true interoperability. So testing design should be consistent, and IHE provides that baseline. IHE says, these are the tests that we will be looking at. That if you want to have some baseline conformance, these are the tests that everyone should be conformant with. If Belgium wants to test the pricing schema for medications, and if Netherlands or Sweden wants to test their narcotics classification, that's fine. But that is another test. But testing for reference strength being different from strength, those form being using this vocabulary, that's something that we have as baseline. Not only the tests designed have to be consistent. Ideally, you would want to have tests using validated solutions and validated processes. Otherwise, anyone can say, I've done my tests, I've run some scripts on my machine, and I have some tests. That's not the maturity that we are aiming at. IHE has been developed a very big maturity framework, a very, very mature framework that has a certified process and certified tooling that allow people to consistently run the tests and having predictable results for the tests. And also very important, community and events. The same way that having a challenge like UNICOM brought lots of people together, having tests events and having a community around, we are all going to test the national prescription or the patient summaries using UNICOM specifications. That is not only important that we engage people, but then we get a lot of feedback there. So having the community and those events also brings a lot of information back to the standards. Are there any questions, topics, trigger? Yep, Luc.
I will come there. Thank you, Jose, for the global perspective. I have two questions for you. The first one is that here we have a specific situation, I would say, is that we have an opportunity to have the data correctly structured, so not all the IDMP, and you have demonstrated that all the attributes are needed for any use case, but how can we position that for industry? So, for example, you mentioned Belgium has an authentic source for medicine, which is compulsory to be used. So basically, there is no interoperability problem anymore for the identification, I would say. Of course, now if you deal with advanced use cases and process, then of course you again need specification to articulate the data and so on. So how do you integrate that, and how the industry has to position itself looking at that, and hopefully with the dream to have a fully integrated system one day where the data can flow from the pharma industry down to the industry driven systems. And my second question is that's for the testing tools. In UNICOM, we had the opportunity to try to connect the private sector and the public sector together, which usually was pretty much reluctant to work together in the same kind of testing environment. And I would say that we discovered that for Medicine Product Agency, they didn't know much about fire. Let's be clear, before the project, some of them had a bit of knowledge, but they discovered what standards were about. I mean, exchange standards with the project. So we have a dream just to build a community where we don't have different testing environments adapted for any kind of stakeholder. So what is your proposal to bring the public sector in the picture?
Thank you. Thank you, Luke, for very good questions. The first one is so good that I even have a slide for it, for the Belgian situation. That's really a good point. I think it's an important point because most countries will have the same challenge as we have in Belgium. They have a source or several sources of data, and how does this actually materialize there? So I'm starting with what we did, but I actually want to go into like what does it mean concretely. So I'll try to address that, and please keep me in check if I don't address the Belgian situation. For the other thing as a community, so I'm a technologist, so I like to see real solutions enabled by technology. Also keeping in mind that sometimes the solutions are not technology driven. So there's no technology solution for something that's not a technology problem. But one of the things that I have seen throughout UNICOM and also before, the fact that we have a community that can actually do things together. So for example, if we have hackathons, it's amazing how much you can get a bunch of geeks, myself included, if you get people in the room and say, you know what, strategically IDMP is very important and it's an ISO standard and regulations, blah blah blah. But at the end you get to a conclusion like, you know what, there is a fire standard, there is something that we can use, let's do something, but let's not do something for the sake of technology. Let's show, for example, actually this, I can use this to link this. Can we use this, for example, this is actually something in the beginning of UNICOM, I don't know, George, or maybe before UNICOM, this EPI, it was really in the beginning, or maybe even before, that said, well, if we have this structured data, we can actually have an electronic patient information, like the brochure of the leaflet of the document. We can actually have this structured. And HL7 Europe has been working on this. So part of the collaboration that we have, well, they did the work. But how can we use this, for example, and interestingly in Belgium, we have printed leaflets that are in French and in Dutch. I think they're also in German. But how can I, maybe search online and I get just the part that matters only in my language? Or actually, if I'm a man, how can I see the information that only relates to me? I don't need to see the disadvantages or the contraindications for pregnancy. So with that, so those are just triggers for how can we put this wealth of technology framework that we have, how can we make this at the service of real customer facing or patient facing solutions. So the patient facing app is actually a great example of that. Once we understand not this, not even this, and not this, but once we have like those 5 elements that we need, actually we can say, I can take my mobile app and use a code to exchange these things. And that is a huge enabler to say, to relate people, to see people that say, yeah, that's not just paperwork, that there's actually something that we can use. And I think, so UNICOM is an innovation action, and we have innovated on the areas that we had, but most importantly, in my opinion, we have given the baseline that if you want to hack a solution about IDMP, etc., go to your room, use the server, whatever, and go and use your drivers. We don't know all the problems. We're just a bunch of, from my side, a bunch of people working on standards and or sometimes a bunch of regulators coming together. But if we have some enablers of knowledge, and we can say to the industry, you will have challenges. And now I'm going back to this thing. We don't know what challenges the different players will have around dispensing or supply chain. For example, shortages of drugs. How can we address shortages of drugs? Well, if we put 10 people in a room, some of them functional, some of them technical, I'm pretty sure that we can discuss it. Yeah, we could actually have a list of a list of substances that are maybe the product that is being very commonly prescribed is kind of going out of stock, but we have an equivalent there, or we have something there thanks to the IDMP key elements there. We can actually start creating those things and pushing some of that value upstream as well. So we have the regulatory part of our drivers of UNICOM, like the top down. Regulation says this shall be IDMP compatible. That's fine. But for me, the most important is that we have a baseline of we can enable a new range of solutions. We can enable innovative solutions for industry. Farm industry can say, right, I want to use this for monitoring, for investigating the adverse event case, not just for reporting them, which is now possible with the PHP IDs, etc. But I want to enable the actual investigation of adverse events. What happened? Was it the active substance that caused the issue, or maybe one excipient that was not supposed to be there, or something? And maybe we can link this to the supply chain and see how is drug shortage going to impact us, not because this product is on shortage, but because overall for these 5 products, they all use the same substance. And I was mentioning this a few weeks ago. How resilient is our supply chain? Not just necessarily shortage, but how resilient are we in terms of there is one substance, one active ingredient that is used for many, many products, and with the climate change, maybe there's a peak of allergies, and then suddenly we are going to have a shortage of production, not of delivery, but the shortage of in the production stages. I don't think we are aware of all these problems that will exist. What we have is created some baseline technology tools and techniques and data models that we can say, if you start with this, and we don't say we can solve the problem, but if you start with that minimal data set, then at least you are going to be compatible with the prescription side and with regulatory side, etc. So trying to make that those things are not yet another silo of data. That's pretty much how we can enable those things. Luke, is this something that addresses your thing? Luke is saying yes. So before I go to Belgium, I think I still have some things to cover. Yeah, some enablers. So we know that the information being structured that can help us, and we have produced some tooling around this. But basically, the idea is that we have all these identifiers that can be part of a same, let's say, database, and actually this helps produce electronic product information. Another thing that we started working on is, right, we have terminologies, we have identifiers, but who is going to maintain those identifiers? Who is going to ensure that identifiers are not duplicate? Or if I create an identifier in one country, how can I make sure that it's compatible with the other identifier? Who is going to actually author or issue those identifiers? So we also explored some things. This is a slide from the implementation guide of the WHO Uppsala Monitoring Center. But through UNICOM, we realized, and through this kind of silly diagrams that we have there, like this is complicated. Okay, in practice, how is it going to work? We've seen that, yeah, we need operating models for this. We need to see who is going to be the master of data, and if there is one single master, or how does it work? Do I request a unique identifier? Because if I have a global unique identifier, then maybe it should be issued by one central authority. Who is that authority? And how do they manage it? That's their process to generate these things, but eventually there is kind of an operating model to do this. And now, maybe a brief notion of what happens in the Belgian case. So Luc was saying that in Belgium we do have, and that's true, we have an authentic source of medication information, very appropriately called SAM, Source Authentique des Médicaments. So authentic source of medicinal products. And that is the master database. That is something that is being evolving into FHIR as well, so to be exchangeable in FHIR. But how does that work as the one black box? Actually, we have seen that. So after seeing some details of how it works inside, it's not just one big black box. There are several organizations. The BCPE, BCFE, I think in French, the SPF, so federal organizations. I think all these are, all these are federal organizations, and they actually have. I think the number of arrows here actually is a correct representation of how many lines are there. So I just looked at one preliminary report or analysis that shows this is the data that we have to exchange. So I don't want this to be representative of something that I say is true, but this just an example of how this could be, but it's in this order of complexity, that one organization has to provide the substance number. The other one has to create from that the actual product identifier, and the other one owns the dose forms, and the other one owns the classifications, and but the third one takes those classifications and creates the product identifier with the classification. So each one of these entities is getting data from everyone else. And how does it work here in Belgium is that at this moment it's just a big black box. But if you want this big black box to communicate with IMA, for example, and with other sources, first of all, the outer interface of this box has to be IDMP compatible. And again, what IDMP compatible means is that the key elements that we have identified, they have to be exchangeable in a known form. So that if in Belgium we have our own concepts of medication, I'll get to that in a second, but we have our own terminologies for dose forms, etc. That's fine, but if we exchange it with the European Medicines Agency, then there has to be a correspondence to EDQM. Or if you want to go cross-border, then a Belgian prescription has to be converted through those dose forms. Those dose forms have to be converted into EDQM dose forms, because that's the agreed terminology for dose forms in cross-border scenarios. How do we do that? So basically, in this image, which is an oversimplification of what we are doing, but just the amount, what matters here is the amount of colors, is the amount of flavors of data exchange. Each of these arrows will contain data, and what we say from UNICOM, and this is our delivery to the industry, all the industries, that we cannot say exactly which data you have to exchange. We cannot say this, but we can say that if in any of these arrows, if you exchange dose form, then dose form should be DQM format. If not, when you come outside of this box for European purposes, it has to be mapped to EDQM dose forms, and that's it. So there's lots of connections there. Some of this information is internal Belgian classification or internal pricing information, and that's fine. We don't want to mess with that from ITMP perspective. What we say is that if any of these arrows contain something that UNICOM has identified as a key attribute of medication, make it IDMP compliant in this format. That's all we say. Technology-wise, that's all we say. And Belgium has this scenario. I'm pretty sure that there will be countries with a simpler infrastructure, but there will be countries with a more complex infrastructure for this. And that's fine. We don't have to say, that's one of the key things on UNICOM, we don't have to say everyone shall do these things the same way. What we do is, if you exchange dose form, do it in this format. If you exchange substance, use this terminology. If you do strength, please see if it's strength or reference strength. Those are different things. Use the right one and use the UCOM for values, for the value of the strength. That's what we say. So in terms of addressing the Belgian situation regulatory, we will still have that black box. That black box will have the current interfaces to the prescription systems, etc. But as we are migrating to FHIR as a nation, we are also trying to see that, can we get the product information for prescriptions, for dispenses? Can we also get that into a FHIR format? And if so, do we really want this thing? Or do we want something like this? And I think we all want something like this. And that's pretty much how we are contributing for the outside of the box. And for the inside of the box, as I said, is if you have any data exchanges between the different entities, if I'm a standards person, so I like to say that FHIR will solve lots of these problems, but most important is if it works, then it stays working. If we don't need these things to be working in FHIR between the SPF and the adhesive, the needy organizations, if we don't need these things to be changed, then they are working fine. They're working fine. Of course, if they are spreadsheets, eventually, as a matter of governance, we should evolve with this. But that is pretty much the key point. Outside of this, there should be an IDMP compatible flavor of this database, and UNICOM delivers the minimum for that. And inside this box, as countries go through their migration path, they should have in UNICOM a reference model that they can use a subset of. Look, does that make sense? Now, for some fun stuff. I don't know how we are on time. You have time? For those that are having to implement this, it's complicated. It is, and by this I mean it's not something that cannot be understood, but it is something that no single person will have all the knowledge. This requires collaboration. I have no idea how many things work in the regulatory area. I don't have to know. The same way that colleagues from the terminology part, they might have the notions of ontology, but they don't know how fire works, and that's fine. So putting all this together is really complicated. So what we have discovered is that every country was trying to do things the best they could, but they were all reading a PDF and interpreting it differently. So we have started collecting that data. This is the UNICOM Fire Implementation Guide. This is hosted at HL7 Europe repository. So what we started collecting is what is really our minimal model, so that the people that want to start with this, they don't have to go through the same learning curve that we did. That's the first thing that we started capturing. This is a huge accelerator for industry. So if we want to say what's our delivery for industry, I think at this moment on the technology side is accelerators. You don't have to spend 2 years interpreting your own version of what IDMP means. You start with this, and this provides you a safe base to start. And if you say, I need something different from this, that's fine, but at least this part is compatible. So we capture that in implementation guide with profiles, with example data to validate what we mean. I'll get there in a second. Some code systems that we knew existed, but they were not documented in a technical way. We made some fun stuff on visualization, and it contains some data from Estonia, from Portugal, and from Sweden. So it contains data. So we have specifications, and we say this is how data from Sweden would look like. This is from how data from Estonia would look like, and this is how data from Portugal would look like in the same model. So we have specifications and some examples. This is all in a fire implementation guide. And before I go here, let me just, if you allow me, oh, that's not what I want. Sorry. I'm just going to show how this. So for those that are not familiar to see with an implementation guide on fire, I'm just talking about this. This is a specification that contains some description of what it is about, contains lots of text to see what it is, but most important, it contains the technical specifications. For example, when I say we have a minimal model of a medicinal product, this is how it looks like. There is a model that contains all those key elements that we have identified. And there's still a lot, but this is what we have come up with as the core model of specifications. And we have example data, and we have value sets, and we have lots of all of these things into one concise specification. So when I say accelerators, is that anyone can take this specification and make their own flavors of this specification. So if I want to say I want to go for the Belgian specification, I will have my model, which is a subset of this model, and that's fine. And if I use that as a starting point, then I save 1 or 2 years of understanding how this is. So UNICOM as an innovation action delivers not only the baseline, but a starting point for other platforms to start to leverage from and to start from there. And then we also add examples. So for example, here is a product. One of the things that we notice is that, let me just show this before showing this, let me show this. If you ask anyone, can we do this? So when we're doing prototyping and when we're doing development, and this is about accelerating for industry, if you ask a developer, can we do this by hand, these files here by hand, let's say a sane developer would say, no, this is just too much of a complicated file. This is really just impossible for one person to work on this manually. We had that experience from UNICOM. We had to do a few things manually, but then we realized that it's just not possible to understand what it is. So IDMP is sufficiently complicated that it's not simple or it's not accessible for us to look at technical files. So one of the things that we did in terms of innovation is just to add some easier ways of representing the same data. So this is just one of the innovative things that we did in UNICOM. This is, I guess we can I hope we can agree this is really much easier to understand in terms of this is a product that has a marketing authorization and has two packages, and the package contains this and this and this, and this is pretty much the same diagram that we had before. The other one was conceptual. This is actually the real data, and this is easier to understand. So we also started putting some enablers out there so that if anyone wants to create examples of their data, any country, any organization, the SAM V2 database in Belgium, if they want to see how would this look in Fire, they can actually see how this would look like. The other things that we have is, for example, we have validation here. I'll actually show the validation later, or we'll show the validation later. So we have these enablers to understanding that this is technologically feasible, but doesn't make which doesn't make it simple. It's still complicated. So we had lots of pushes for making things a bit more accessible. Now going a bit again into the slideshow. Yep. We have also defined some transactions that are the ones that I mentioned in the beginning. So transactions that are specifications of data exchange. So if you want to exchange data for product data in a catalog, this is the data that you should have. If you want to exchange data about a product in a clinical document, like in a summary or in a prescription, this is the data that you should have. And if you want to talk about substitution, these are the data elements that you should consider for substitution. We clarify those and we say, this is the vanilla flavor. This is the baseline for having that data exchange. You can add more data to this because you have the pricing information, the classification of the products. That's all fine to add, but this is how you exchange that data. So what UNICOM has produced is some baseline specifications for how does these types of systems, the product data provider and the product data consumer, so like these actors, if I'm a catalog, a medication catalog system, then I will implement the product data provider. And this means that I can submit data in a regulatory format or submit data if requested into a clinical format. Those are the two flavors of the same data. And we came up with these baseline transactions that we want to say, if you want to ever be tested about these things, to have conformance testing was what we said, what we discussed before, what I presented. If you want to have these baseline testable specifications, this is where you start with. Yeah, so we have these transactions as kind of baseline specifications. And in terms of innovation, we also created a thing called UNICOM Toolbox. So by using the pain of the many colleagues that had to create data by hand, so people had to create those XML files that I showed by hand, and that was a huge amount of effort with lots of traps, lots of places to make to have errors unwillingly. So we created some enabler. So we actually put this together, like putting open source solutions at the service of the implementers, saying that if you want to do some IDMP implementation, start with this. Not only the specifications, but things like this easy to visualize or visualizer for easy to see data, and product browser like a product list. This was inspired by, for example, UFIS, the server that we had before. And we put this all into one repository so that if I want to start working on IDMP, if I'm in the government agency or if I'm in a pharmaceutical company or if I'm in a private company that wants to develop something and wants to play with this, I will have something about IDMP in a toolbox. I think we can mention this. We can go through this a bit later, but just wanting to look at how it looks like. It's basically a server that contains some data. And the good thing I can say this, it's no longer that complicated. That's pretty much what I wanted to say. It's no longer that we try to make it, to wrap it up in a way that it's not complicated for others to use. We have product browsers. We can see this is the list of products that I have on my server. I can create more. I can search. And I can do validation. And I can visualize the products. We have two visualizers there. And we can do the validation by saying, if I use this thing, am I conformant with the UNICOM specifications or not? Then the system actually provides that report. Let me make it real here. We are saying that UNICOM produces specifications, for example, terminologies. If I'm using a substance or if I'm using a dose form, and if I put a code for dose form that does not exist in EDQM, That is exactly what we're talking about. I want the system to tell me this product is fine, but the dose form is not in a recognizable code. And this is something that humans should not do. Computers can do automatically. That's what we automated. That's what we built. And no one has to look at these JSON files or XML files. The system will do that for you. This is a huge time saver operationally. So the toolbox has all of these things put together into one easy to deploy containerized image. Sorry for the technical jargon, but for developers, this is really an accelerator. And what I wanted to mention as a comment here is that if we say what have we delivered these accelerators, so for the pharmaceutical industry, for the governments, they should not have to go through the same pain points and the learning experience that we did. They can, but if they want to say, let's just start from where they left or where they have, in two aspects, this is what we have delivered. First, the learning platforms, all these toolings, existing servers that they can play with without spending their time trying to learn what is this fire thing is about and how much of IDMP do I have to look into. We say start with this and you're already in a good point. So this tooling that we have. Here's a couple of examples that can help you with that. And both for government agencies and for pharma industry, this actually means that instead of spending those months in developing a prototype or analyzing data or creating some data feeds, instead of spending months in analyzing this can come down to a couple of weeks, days. And that's what we are talking about here. We are accelerating that development process by providing the tools for this, step one, and then ensuring that all these tools, all these specifications, they are part of the same system so that next year, if you want to test them in a testing event, I know that the Belgian specification is going to be tested in the same criteria as the Norwegian specification. So what we provide is the baseline for people to create their products and their services, and the testing services that allow us to consistently and compatibly test all those things against each other so that we have a chance at interoperability on this very difficult area. I will stop for now before we continue with the rest to get some water, and I thank you for your patience. Thank you.
So before you go, are there any questions in the room or outside the room?